Hello and welcome to another WIP Wednesday. If you're a returning viewer, thanks so much for choosing to come back, hang out, spend a little bit of your day with me. And yes, I've got the same blanket that I was working on Monday. Have I worked on it anymore since my video? Nope. Does that mean I haven't been knitting and crocheting? Nope, not at all. I still got lots. When I feel unsure about the project that I'm working on, then I just set it down and, well, usually start something else. So look at this. I got the Brava Baby DK here in the black. I've just been crocheting with it. Now, I don't know what I'm doing with it because I don't have a pattern or anything. I'm just playing with my yarn. Yeah, that's what I've been doing when I'm not sure what I want to do with this blanket. I mean, airplane or boat with the blanket. Don't know yet. Don't know if we're even going to finish it. So I've been crocheting with this black yarn. Don't have a pattern. Just playing with my yarn. I've been crocheting with the gray Baby DK. Cast on some Dishi and the jalapeno. Got some knitting needles there. So I'm definitely still got some busy fingers, right? But I haven't made decisions on this blanket, so I'm just like, set it down and think about it some more, right? And it's also a great, while I'm working on this stockinette portion, it's a great project for me to come on and work on while I chat with you, because I don't really, beyond like the seed stitch, right? I don't have to count and pay attention to anything. So that's, that's partially why I save sections of projects like this to come on for WIP Wednesdays and Mondays with May and any other like chat type videos, because if it involves like memorizing a pattern or shaping or something or cables, then I'm not really gonna be able to hold a conversation, and you don't want to listen to me do all that counting. And plus, if it's a paid for pattern, then I don't want to give away somebody else's pattern on the video, right? Like either one of these blankets, whether I choose to do a boat blanket or a plain blanket or whatever, you know what? It's going to be a paid for pattern. So yeah, I'll show you the finished project, right? Because that's what you'd see if you were buying the pattern. But I don't want to give you their pattern. I don't want to be like 5 knit 5 purl 2, right? Like I can't give you somebody else's pattern. We got to respect the copyright. So anyways, let me know though, what are you doing today? What are you working on while we're hanging out together? Where you at? Where you watching from? What's on your needles? What's on your hooks? Are you sewing? Are you like working a puzzle? Are you going for a walk? Are you cleaning your house? Are you folding your socks? Like, what are we doing while we're hanging out together? I like to know those things, right? Like, what stuff are you up to? Are you just doing life stuff? So anyways, happy to be here with you all. I am recording this video for October 1st, which as I mentioned on the Monday video, right, on the Mondays with May, October is Blindness Awareness Month. And so, yeah, we're going to be talking about it some this month. So even like during our WIP Wednesdays, we'll talk about it some. I mean, look, I am legally blind. 365 days a year, right? So I'm not just going to talk about visual impairments during Blindness Awareness Month. I'm sure if you're a returning viewer, you know that, right? You're like, yeah, she tells us all the time she's colorblind, right? Yeah. So, but if there's a vision issue that I have, if there's a reason why I can't tell you the details on a yarn label, you know why. It's because I can't read the fine print. I can still read the real large print on a lot of the labels, but I can't read the small print anymore. So, you hear about it all the time. You know that. But I'm also going to talk about like other things. And, like I said, I kind of feel ambivalent about the blanket. Well, guess what? I feel ambivalent about talking about blindness and disability stuff and vision impairment stuff too much, just because I do want this to be about yarn. But I also realize, that this is kind of like it's a yarn channel primarily, but it's also like a vlog, right? It's a vlog, so that's where you see some of the cooking stuff on occasion. And, I just thought the hair coloring fun would be interesting for people who'd never colored hair before, that kind of thing. Let me know about that, what your thoughts are on that. But to me, part of the reason why I'm deciding to talk about it some is because, as I've mentioned in a lot of videos, according to the World Health Organization, there are 16 million people on the planet that are considered legally blind. And I suspect that it's higher than that. I think some of the data shows that like at least half of those people or something like that, 8 million, are just in the United States. And we know that, the United States isn't like half of the world's population, right? And so I think the reason why we have so much data on legal blindness and vision impairments from the United States, what looks like our the numbers are high here in comparison to the world numbers, is because we have a Census Bureau and we have Department of Labor statistics and those kinds of things, whereas you compare it to a lot of other places in the world, right, where they don't necessarily even know when people are born and when people die, and some of the real remote areas of Africa and South America, Asia, that kind of places, Pakistan, some real rural and remote areas that we might not have good data on, right? So we won't even know how many people there are considered, legally blind, and they don't have good medical care to even diagnose somebody. So I'm sure the numbers are actually higher than even 16 million, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. But just when I look at the United States data alone and compare it to the global numbers, I think, if you were to compare it, you'd think, wow, like, a huge portion of the world's legally blind people are in the United States. And it's like, well, actually, I think it's higher. It's just that we don't have the data from many other areas of the world. I mean, there are places in the world still where we don't even have birth records, right? So my dad, I'm sure I talk about my dad a lot. My dad's 89, so he was born in, 1936. But we don't even know if he's actually 89. He might be like 86, right? Because we don't know what day he was born. We don't know what year he was born. Like, there's, literally no birth record of my father being born. So we don't actually know his real birth date at all. So, and I realized that was, 89 or 86 years ago. And things have changed all over the world, right? All over the world, we have technology and better records and, electronic records and all those kinds of things. So I realize that technology is slowly reaching the entire world. So we do have better data and birth records, but there are still places in the world where people don't even have birth records. And so the reality is they don't have a Census Bureau, going around and taking a census and recording every birth and every death, and every person doesn't get, brought into a medical clinic and brought in for a diagnosis of their visual impairment, right? And some places wouldn't even consider somebody like myself necessarily blind, unless they don't really consider you blind unless you have absolutely no sight at all. Whereas here in the United States, a lot of medical places would still consider me blind, even though a lot of people socially don't. A lot of people in the blind community don't. So I'm not totally blind, but I'm just blind in the daylight and all that kind of a thing. So anyways, but I think it's really important to talk about visual impairments, because millions of people, right? If you're so blessed to live to be 89 or 90 or whatever, you're likely going to experience some kind of change in your vision, right? A visual impairment of some kind, deteriorating eyesight of some type. I already hear people all the time, I can't read the print anymore, right? And my books, and I have to use magnifiers, and I have to enlarge things. And people, when people lose their driver's license because of eyesight, it's a big deal. It's a really, really big deal. People struggle with that. And so, and I'm not saying that I know what that's like, because I've never had a legal driver's license, right? So I can't speak to all of the experiences that people go through. We're going to have different experiences. I've talked about that in another video, that I don't for a minute think that I represent the whole community, okay? But during this month, and anytime really, if you want to ask a question about my visual impairment, I hope that you feel okay to ask that. That's partially why I decided to talk about Blindness Awareness Month this month, even though I kind of don't want to. I kind of want to be like, look at my pretty yarn, right? Look at my yarn that's called Tranquil, that I'm told is a blue-green, which I actually thought it was more blue, by the way. When I first sent pictures of this yarn to my sister, I'm like, it's a light blue, and she's like, it's more green. I'm like, are you sure? And she's like, yeah, it's green. So if you are colorblind, or you didn't watch the Monday video, by the way, it is the Brava Bulky from Knit Pig Sweet Crochet. It's 100% acrylic and the color Tranquil. So So anyways, what was I saying? I completely lost track of what I was talking about when I stopped to talk about my yarn. Okay, so anyways, but feel free to ask questions if they have to do with, visual impairments and blindness, and I'll do my best to answer, based upon my experience, the knowledge that I have, and as I said, I can't possibly speak for everybody out there, but I can, I can talk to you about my 47 years of life experience, right, of being legally blind my whole life, of being colorblind my whole life, of never being able to legally drive, of 17 years with guide dogs. I've had a white cane for 37 years. I went to college for 10 years as mainstream in public school. So I can certainly speak to those experiences, even though I can't ever speak to the, what it is like for people to, to lose their driver's license, or, to have those experiences. I can't talk, or to what it's like to be totally blind from birth, right? I have friends who are totally blind from birth, have never seen anything ever, and I can't speak to that either, because, I don't know that. So, but I have moments of total blindness, and I don't know if everybody who's viewing this knows that. I was born with a visual condition called optic nerve hypoplasia. And so that just means that my optic nerve stopped developing before I was born. And so I have like a super, super primitive visual system where I don't see any color. I see shapes and shades. I can see high contrast stuff really well. My day vision cells in my eyes are not attached to my brain at all. So think about what you see at night, but I only have a little bit of what you would see at night. So, but I don't have daylight vision. And so, so I have moments when I'm outside in the sunlight, I have moments of total blindness because the light is it's too bright for me to open my eyes. I talk about that, how, if you're sitting in a dark room, and suddenly somebody turns on like a bright overhead light, right? And your eyes are burning and you're squinting. You got to close your eyes for a few seconds while your eyes adjust to the daylight, to the light above you, the overhead light or whatever. My eyes can never do that. My eyes can never ever adjust to daylight ever, because those cells in my eyes aren't attached to my brain. And so I always, when my eyes are open, when there's light in the environment, which is why I do like to record in the evening, it's that burning sensation. It's like this bright burning sensation in my eyes, and it's pretty painful. I get headaches, and I have days when I just literally can't use my eyes for anything if it's real bright out, or if I spend a lot of time in the light or anything like that. And so I have moments when I'm outside in the sunlight. I love being outside in the sunlight, I do, but I have to be careful, because of headaches and things, which the headaches from the light can sometimes be more debilitating, and more limiting than the blindness, actually, right? Like, I've learned to function just fine without the sight part outside, navigating with my cane and doing things with my ears and that kind of a thing. It's sometimes I'll get a headache from the light, and that's actually that's harder on me than, walking around with a white cane. So, anyways, though, so I have, just constantly changing vision based upon the light in my environment. And I've talked about this in a couple other videos. I don't like to talk about it in every single video, but I also know that I have new subscribers coming to my channel all the time who might not know that and might not go back and watch all the videos, which is totally fine. You don't need to go back and watch all the videos if you don't want to. If you want to check out some of my earlier videos, though, you can. I have an introductory video where I get super deep and super nerdy McNerd into all the details of my visual impairment and my diagnosis, because I did go to graduate school in psychology, and I took neuropsych, and I love that kind of stuff. So I get really nerdy on like the neuroanatomy and all that kind of stuff. And I have other videos about just like my crochet journey and my knitting journey, and how my deteriorating eyesight's affected me in terms of knitting. Those are some of my earliest videos. So if you are more interested in some of that stuff, and I'm sure we'll revisit some of that stuff this month for Blindness Awareness Month, because I have more new subscribers, and I'm super, super excited about that. Thank you so much. If you are a returning viewer and you enjoy my content a lot, it really helps me if you consider subscribing to my channel. And I want to thank everybody who has chosen to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so, so much. That means a lot to me. But it means a lot to me because that's what YouTube really pays attention to, right? YouTube cares. YouTube cares about how many subscribers we have. So that's why I say that. So that's why I say a huge shout out and thank you to the subscribers. And if you're not subscribed, it's okay too. Just watching's cool. It's like you can just hang out and watch when you can. Watch when something's, interesting to you. That kind of a thing. That's fine. But that's why I say that, because YouTube wants to know. And that's how they make decisions about whether we get money and whether we get promoted more in the algorithm or not. So it sends a message to YouTube that, hey, this person's interesting to listen to. That's all. That's the only reason that I care. So anyways, so why I think it's really important to talk about this stuff, though, even though I kind of don't want to talk about it all the time, is because I know that when people all the time have changing eyesight, right? Millions of people have experienced changes in their vision one way or another. And it's really frightening for people. Some people are horribly. There are people that when they take surveys and talk to people, there are people that would literally say that they'd rather die than go blind. I'm like, are you kidding me? But I know it's scary. In that moment, they're so afraid. They're afraid of the loss of independence. They're afraid of not being able to drive. They're afraid they won't even be able to, walk around their own home. They're afraid they won't be able to cook. And that's usually, for most people, what that means is a loss of independence, right? It's like, and most people, if you're an able-bodied, functional adult who's owned your own home and had your own career and, raised a family, and then all of a sudden you're faced with the idea that I might become, dependent on others, it's really frightening for people. And so, and I'll be the first to admit, where I live right now, I am dependent on others for driving. This is my first time. I've lived here for 9 years in almost 9 months, 8 months, 9 months. Yeah. So I have been here for 9 months now. 9 years and 9 months. Yeah. So I moved in on January 1st, 2016. So 9 years and 9 months. So about this time, I'm not new to living in a remote, rural location at all. As a non-driver, I'm not new to being here, but this is my first time, to live remotely like this in a situation where, I get dependent on other people, where I can't just drive myself to the store, walk to a store, or take a bus. Like I've always lived in apartments and in houses and in cities and in places, where I can walk to a store. I can I had guide dogs in the city or in towns and stuff, and I would just walk to a grocery store, walk to the bus stop, walk to everywhere I needed, to a bus stop or to a train or whatever. When I was in college, I did date a man who lived way remote, more remote than I am now. Yeah, really. But, I never lived with him full time. I'd live on the weekends with him. I'd live with him on Christmas breaks and spring breaks and summer. On my college breaks, sometimes I'd spend, maybe 6 or 8 weeks up there over the summer. But it wasn't ever, beyond that. It wasn't more than, a couple of months. And so, he was working during that. So I was kind of stuck out there, sometimes when he was at work. But, he would go to the grocery store and that kind of a thing. So it wasn't it wasn't, it's different than how I am now. Let's just say that. It's very different. So, I get that the loss of being able to drive is really scary for people. But at the same time, I want to still be able to be here on the internet to say to people, you can still do life when you experience visual impairments, right? You can still knit, you can still crochet without being able to see, but you can do so much more than that. I don't for a minute want people to think okay, so she does this. I do. That's why occasionally I do pop in a cooking video, right? I'm I want you to know that when you can't see, you can absolutely still cook meals for yourself. You can still do everyday life. And so that's why I feel that people fear visual impairments a lot. They're afraid for themselves, or if it's their spouse or their partner, they're afraid of what that means for them. They're afraid if they can return to work or not. And people are just afraid about, what their limitations are or might be in life. And I don't think there's really that many. Okay, I'm just gonna be real with you. I don't think beyond the driving thing. Like if if you're a professional bus driver, yeah, you are gonna have a career change, right? If you play in the NFL, you're gonna have a career change. There are some jobs. I'll be the first to tell you there are some jobs that I won't be able to do, right? But for the most part, I think that most careers you can do with a variety of disabilities, okay? Whether it's hearing impairment or visual impairment or, mobility impairment. In today's world, with, the American Disabilities Act anyway, we have elevators and wheelchair ramps and buildings are accessible in the United States. Not everything, right? There are places that were built before then. But that's also what I wanted to talk about is that I feel like the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. Okay, so here in the and I know that this doesn't apply to everybody, right? I realize that the internet is a global community, and I have a global audience, and I'm super excited by that. By the way, super excited. I love that, right? I've had people say hello from England. Hello, England. And by the way, I am a quarter English. My mom's side, my maternal grandmother, were Brits. And somebody said hello in the comments from Japan. So, konnichiwa, Japan. So I'm super excited about that, which I love that about the internet. I love that we get to connect across the globe. I think that is so cool that I'm the same way. Like I watch Krista from the Secret Yarnery, and she's in Kenya, and she'll be on there doing a live, and I'll happen to catch it, and it's like usually like 5 or 6 in the morning my time because it's dinner time at her place, and I still think it is so cool that we're live together, even though we're something like 12 or 14 hours apart, right? We're like live together on the internet, and I can be like, hi, Krista from Washington State, and I think it's so cool. So there's something so interesting about that, right? Uh, so so I know that when I talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act, I totally recognize that for like global people, you're like, that's not here, that's not us, and so I get that. But we've had that for 35 years, and so a lot of our buildings now. Public buildings, when they want to renovate at all, they have to make those renovations with accessibility in mind, right? They've got to put in elevators, they've got to put in wheelchair ramps, they've got to put in accessibility features. Now, it's rare, businesses can get grandfathered in under certain circumstances, but for the most part, you're going to find buildings, especially out here on the West Coast. It is a little different. I'll be honest with you. It's definitely different on the East Coast because the East Coast is older than the West Coast, right? And so the East Coast is actually not as accessible physically. Like the infrastructure, the architecture on the East Coast is actually not as accessible to people with disabilities in many areas as the West Coast because we're newer cities over here, right? The East Coast was developed a lot older. There's a lot more historical buildings and older buildings over there. Not saying we don't have historical older buildings out west here. We do, but in comparison, we don't have quite as many. And so a lot of our buildings here are much more likely to be wheelchair accessible. Whereas on the East Coast, like I know that some of these stations for the subway in New York and stuff like that, they're not accessible. But a lot of them are now, but they're not as much, or like the elevators just don't work. Whereas out here, uh, like they all have like wheelchair accessibility, right? They've all got elevators in them, and they all have that kind of accessibility stuff in mind. So there is a difference, and I've heard that not just from visiting over there, but I've heard that from people who live and people who travel a lot more. And then of course Europe is a whole different story. I've never been to Europe. My sister's been to Europe numerous times. I've talked to friends and people who live over there, and so I know that not only do you not have the Americans with Disabilities Act, but you have really old. Like when I think East Coast buildings are old, I'm like England, right, and Ireland, and some of the other countries over there have really, really old infrastructure, right? Italy and France and stuff. My sister will bring me back pictures from like Italy, from buildings that are like, hundreds of years old. And I'm just gonna tell you, we just don't have stuff like that here on the West Coast. Okay, I mean it's rare. Like I said, we do have things that are old, but not like super super old. Like my neighbor has a barn that was built during World War II, so almost 100 years ago, probably, 85 years ago, and that's considered old out here, and it is old, and I love it. It's so cool. But it's, that's like when we talk about old structures out here, that's what we're talking about. My neighbor's barn. So, not saying that you won't find buildings out here that are like, 100 years old. You will. They're just fewer. But anyway, so we do have the Americans with Disabilities Act here, and that has helped us tremendously in terms of accessibility. And so I really feel like, especially where I live, and especially with government buildings like universities, okay, I've worked in universities, and they get state and federal funding, and they have to be accessible. They have elevators, they have, larger bathroom stalls, and braille on the bathrooms, and braille on the classroom numbers, and so they're accessible structure-wise and architectural-wise. But it's different, but at the same time, so I feel like we've dealt in many ways as a society. We've just accepted that, right? We've accepted that we have elevators. We've accepted that there's flat curb cuts. Even as a person who's visually impaired, right? Who I use a cane, and it's harder for me to feel sometimes, even where that little curb cut is for a wheelchair. And yet we've learned to accept that, right? Of course I want that for all of my friends who have mobility issues, right? Of course I want them to not have to step up onto a curb and all of that. I've had numbers of friends with wheelchairs and walkers and canes and things like that. So of course we want those things for everybody so that people can access places. But even that is something that, as a person who uses a white cane, it's like, okay, for me to feel that sometimes is a lot more challenging to feel when there's a really, really flat, entrance into the street. It can challenge me. It can challenge my white cane skills. Occasionally it challenged my guide dogs. Not that much though. I'll tell you what, my guide dogs for the most part understood that really, really well. They had occasional moments where they would blow those flat curbs. But for the most part, they understood very well how to find those and show those to me. So, but we get really accustomed to that. Like, it's rare for me to even be in a public building anymore where there's not braille on the elevator, which I think is super cool. I'm like so beyond excited about that. But it's rare anymore. So I feel like in our country and in our world, right, we're building accessibility physically into structures, and we get very used to seeing those things. So I feel like in some ways, it's exciting because we've made really good. I'm going to knit a little bit more. I don't know that I'm going to finish another row here, but we'll chat a little bit more. So I feel like we've made, really good progress in some ways since the ADA, but in other ways we haven't. And those are the things that, I want to talk about this month is, the ways that I still feel like we have to continue, where there's still a lot of needs improvement, okay? Because there is, and that's the reality. You hear my screen reader when we talk about yarns on here and yarn sales and info, like I show you the color descriptions at Knit Picks. I love, love, love that they have the best color descriptions out there. That just thrills me, okay? I'm like, oh yeah, this is why you get my money, right? This is why I get my money to you. This is why I eat canned soup, right? So I can buy yarn from a company that has, this is why I'm eating beans and rice, right? Because I give my money to a yarn company that provides me really good, color descriptions. So but the reality is that a lot of the internet is not fully accessible yet. A lot of apps still aren't fully accessible yet. And we can talk about that more in other videos. But I feel like the internet is still very much an area where accessibility falls behind. Okay, it does, and that's just the reality of it, is that the apps and websites aren't fully accessible for screen readers and people with visual impairments. Just web pages. I wish that every yarn company would describe their colors the way that Knit Picks and We Crochet does. I do. Like, I love Hobby, and they did finally start putting like the names of their colors on their yarns, but for a long time they just had numbers, and that would just irritate me so much. And they finally put color descriptions on there, but it's on the website. But guess what, when the yarn arrives to you, it still just has numbers. It'll still say like 104, right? And I'm like, 104, right? Like, what is that? What is 104? That's not helpful, right? And so then I have to go back either to my order, right, and look it up and see what I bought, or I have to go back to their webpage and look it up, and at least there I can get the info. I can, and I totally appreciate that. But at the same time, I really wish that they would put that on the label, so that when I'm, using my technology, whether I'm trying to magnify it or zoom it in, right, or whatever, or use the app to read it out loud to me, I want more than 104. I would like the information right there printed out on the label. And the same thing with Cascade Yarns, right? I love Cascade Yarns. And if you go to the Cascade Yarns webpage, you can look it up yarn by yarn, and they do give you the color palette, which is cool. And they give it to you in 2 different orders. They give it to you in like the order of color, they give it to you in the order, a numerical order, and that's nice. But again, you look at the yarn labels and it's just numbers, and it's like, you're so close. Your websites have the information that I need, but I want it on the label, right? And so it's like, you're close and yet you're not. So I feel like we still have a long ways to go with that. Another thing that yarn companies could do, is they could try to work with like the barcodes on their labels. They could have a way where you could scan the barcodes and get that information. Like, there's a lot of grocery products now. I don't know if you know that or not, but there's a lot of grocery products that you can scan with your phone, right? Like your phone, and you can actually have it read out to you like the barcode label, and it will actually tell you what that product is, and my screen reader will read it out loud to me. So that's very cool. My issue is finding the barcode, right? You got to like find the barcode on the package and line it up with your phone camera. So that can be challenging in itself when you can't see. But I can see a little bit, but I can't always read all the details on things. So I do like it that that's an option for some things. But yarn companies could certainly look at something like that. And I'll be the first to tell you, I don't understand how grocery stores do that, right? I don't. But the technology is there if people put the effort into it. So I think in terms of the internet, we still lack very much in accessibility. I think in terms of access to products, we lack. And I think a lot of that's just ignorance. It's not because they don't want my money, right? It's not because Hobby doesn't want my money. It's not because Cascade Yarns doesn't want my money. And they do get my money anyways. I still buy their products because at least they've got color labels on the webpage, right? If they didn't have the color labels on the internet, forget it. So I do still choose to shop, with companies where I can say, at least I can look it up and get the info somewhere. So, but I think we have a long ways to go because of ignorance and lack of knowledge. And so that's partially why I want to talk about Blindness Awareness Month this month. I want to talk about so we can educate, because I feel like that's the best way to do it, is to put our minds together, right? To put our minds and our ears together and to listen and to learn from each other, right? I mean, that's what I want to do. I like to learn from other people as well. And so I like to learn about, what helps them with whatever they're dealing with in life. What are you dealing with, and how can we help make things better for you? Okay. And how can we, like I talked about curb cuts, right? It's not the most ideal thing for people who are visually impaired, but yet, I'm super happy that my friends who use wheelchairs can get, up and down and cross the streets. I've crossed streets with many people in wheelchairs. So, yeah, a flat curb can sometimes be challenging for me to detect, but I wouldn't for a minute want to be like, it's all about me, right? I mean, so I learned how to be much more careful and feel with my white cane those things, and listen for other clues in the environment, and have a better understanding of how I can tell that I'm approaching a street. So even with my white cane, it's rare that I'll blow a curb, where I'll completely miss that I crossed a street and not detect that flat that flat edge with my white cane, and they've gotten a lot better too at putting like little bumps, right? Putting the little bumpies the little textured strips and that kind of a thing, or like a ridge or a ribbing or something on the edge. And so we see that a lot now, right? Where there's texture or there's bumps or there's ridges, and that's so that people who are blind and use white canes can still detect the flat curve. And so it's the same thing why we might see like bumps on the edge of the train platforms. I used to take the light rail trains in Portland all the time, and they have that strip at the edge, and it's got the little tactile bumps on it, and that's so that people who are visually impaired, right, can feel under their feet that, oh, I'm, within like a foot of the track, right? And so there's a reason why that surface changes. And so we're all about, saying, okay, we've got to make these modifications, but we've got to make sure that they work for everybody. And so for me, it's like, okay, we got to make the world work for everybody. So I like to talk to my friends and anybody, who's saying, well, this is challenging for me. And we can put all of our thoughts and our technology and our ideas together and say, okay, how can we make this work for you? And how can we make it work for me? So now we have curb cuts, but now we just put texture on the curb cuts, right? We put little bumpies or something, or ridges on the edge of it. So I think it's cool to put our minds together and say, how do we make the world work for everybody? And so technology and the internet, product labeling, that's where I think we still have such a long ways to go when it comes to visual impairments. And then the other thing with visual impairments is just like people, right? People don't mean, I think for the most part, people don't mean, as adults, I'm not talking about kids, right? I've dealt with kids. I went to public school. I was bullied in school, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that I have the market on that. I know people get bullied for being short, for having freckles, right? For being too thin, for being too fat, for wearing glasses, for whatever, right? Kids get bullied in school for just about anything today. So by no means am I saying like, oh, that's just people who are visually impaired. No, I know it happens. It happens. So, people can get picked on and bullied for about anything and everything today. But, beyond that, I think as adults, people don't mean to discriminate, but they just don't know. And they just don't know what the capabilities are of a person who's visually impaired. And so they think, I couldn't imagine doing that without sight, and so it can't be done, right? And so that's partially why I did decide to start a YouTube channel, and why I decided to just say, hey, don't give, if you're knitting or you're crocheting and you're experiencing vision changes, don't give it up. If you're like, I can't see my stitches anymore, don't give it up. Don't. Fine, if it brings you joy still, if it's still like something that you hold on to, that you look forward to doing, then find ways to keep it in your life. And that's why I wanted to be here. But then I realized that voice wasn't there for other areas of life either. And so that's why occasionally I do put on things like, hair coloring and cooking and those types of videos. It's because I feel like it's necessary in other areas of life as well. And so I feel like people really, it's attitudes that we deal with in people, it's belief systems. And the best way that we can challenge those is to have those conversations, right? I think it's really, really important that we have conversations with people who are different than us, who have different disabilities, abilities, come from different countries and places, different religions, different belief systems, different politics. It's really, really important that we just be open and we sit down and we talk and we realize, that, you're different than me, but you know what? We also have a lot in common. We also have a lot of similarities. You know what? You have some really good ideas. I have some really good ideas. Guess what? I might have some really bad ideas too. And you might too. Oh, gasp, right? So, and we might never find agreement on some issues. But I think that the only way that, we help gain understanding, decrease discrimination for all kinds of things, and is to just talk and to just have those conversations. So that's why I really want to put myself out here this month and talk to people a little bit more openly. about visual impairments this month during Blindness Awareness Month is because I feel like that's one of the best ways that we can break down those barriers. Those final barriers, in my opinion, are technology, the internet, and just beliefs and attitudes of people that don't intend. Their intent is not to discriminate against the blind person. I really believe that in my heart. The intention is not discrimination. The intention is not hate. The intention is not, this person is less than or not capable. It's just that they just don't know the how. They're like, I don't know how I would do it, and therefore I don't know how they would do it. And the problem that leads to, which is something I wanted to talk to you about today. Oh my goodness, what is this, 30 minutes into it? And I'm like, oh, I got to my point. I don't know how long this video's been. I got no idea. Got to my point is the unemployment issue in the United States alone, just for people who are considered legally blind of employable age, right? So what do we consider employable age in the United States? Usually that's 16 to 65. It might be like, 17 to 67. Now that kind of changes, right? But, and I usually get my data from U.S. Census Bureau as well as Department of Labor is where I look for data for things like this. But still roughly the unemployment rate of people who are considered legally blind and of employable age. So I'm not talking about people who are 90, right? I'm talking about employable age. I'm not talking about people who are 85 even. It's right around that 69 to 70% range. Can you believe that? That's got to be one of the highest unemployment rates, right? When we talk about unemployment rates, like unemployment rates are rising for this group or that group, or unemployment's rising to 10% or whatever. Could you imagine if they talked about that on TV and they said the unemployment rate is almost 70%? Could you imagine how shocked people would be by that statistic? I think it's shocking. I do. I'm like, what in the world? And so, in my opinion, the reason is because people who are blind don't even get the opportunity to get in the door. They don't get the opportunity to have a chance. They don't get the opportunity to get hired because people see the white cane, people see the guide dog, and then they move on, right? Now, obviously, I'm not saying we should just go out and hire people who are visually impaired, right? We have to be, just like with any other group of people, anybody, we have to be qualified, right? If I don't have the college degree and I don't have the experience, you shouldn't hire me for the position, right? I mean, if I have like volunteer experience that's similar, that's fine. I might have relevant experience in volunteer work or in life. So it's always important to consider those things. But at the same time, you shouldn't just hire me for something random that I don't have the knowledge and that I don't have the education for, especially if there's somebody else who is applying for that position who does have, right, education and experience and all that. So I'm not saying at all that we should be hiring visually impaired people who lack education or who lack requirements, who lack valid experience. But at the same time, we all have to get experience somewhere, right? And so I really feel like a lot of the barriers, I think the barriers are less in terms of education. I think blind people are getting their degrees. They're going to college. So they're getting degrees, but they're just not able to get hired. Then there's a huge gap between, okay, I went to college, I got the computer, I got the technology, I got the books, I did the reading, I wrote the papers, right? And then they can't get hired. So I thought I would share with you something from my own personal life that I wanted to talk about just briefly today. Is that I talk about it in some of my Not Your Therapist Thursday videos, right? I do some Not Your Therapist Thursday videos because I went to college for 10 years and got a master's degree and a doctorate degree in psychology. And I worked in mental health. I worked in college counseling centers. And so I went to 10 years of college. But I don't tell this to people a lot, but I was unemployed with a doctorate degree for 6 years. Okay? 6 years. And I applied for jobs. I applied for a lot of jobs. I applied for jobs that only required a master's degree. I applied for jobs that were only asking for a bachelor's degree. I applied for jobs that I was way overqualified for. I applied for just jobs, right? Because I needed a job. And so, excuse me. So I think it's really important to, say, well, why why did I go to college for 10 years and get a master's and doctorate degree with, 30 other people in school who went to the same school, who went to the same college, who got the same piece of paper, right? We all got diplomas, right? It's a doctorate in psychology, PsyD, right? And, we all got $100,000, spent $100,000 on our education. And why were they getting jobs and I wasn't, right? Why? Was it the guide dog? Was it the way it came? Why was that? And so I think we have to really stop and pause and say, and ask the question, right? Why did I live on food stamps? I had a doctorate degree and I was living on food stamps. Yeah, and I wasn't retired, right? I was in my 20s and in my 30s. And so we have to ask ourselves, why would somebody in their 20s and in their 30s with a doctorate degree be living in a tiny 400 square foot, room with their 75-pound guide dog, Rosie the rock star, my third German Shepherd, why would I be living in an income related apartment? It was an apartment complex where your rent was based upon your income, which was super nice for me. It worked out well. It wasn't like government low income housing, but it was a deal that the contractors basically had, the owners and the contractors had with the city, where it was like, you can build so many buildings here, but you have to have like a income based complex where people of all incomes can come in and live. And so I was able to get a studio in one of those buildings in the Pearl District in Portland, which is a really nice district. Or was. I don't know what's going on in Portland now. Woo! But it was a really nice area in Portland at the time. And so I was able to get, a studio apartment for a really reasonable price over there when I finished graduate school. And so, but why was I doing that when I had a doctorate degree, when my classmates, who graduated with me were getting jobs, right? We have to ask the question, the why. And in my opinion, it's because people didn't want to hire me because I was visually impaired. And was that the only reason? I don't know. I couldn't tell you if the other applicants were more qualified than I was. Well, actually, I can. Some of the jobs, they were not. I'm just going to tell you, some of the people who applied for some of the jobs didn't have doctorate degrees in psychology. Okay, I know that, actually. So I can actually say that for some of the positions that I applied for, people who with less education than myself got the jobs. Okay, I know that because I know people who worked in some of the places who tipped me off and said, hey, we have a job opening here. You should apply for it. Okay, so I got a lot of my job interviews through, referral, through word of mouth. I would tell everybody. When I lived in Portland and I was unemployed, I told everybody. I was like, yeah, I'm unemployed, still looking for work. Unemployed. Hi, how are you? Unemployed still. I have a 6-figure loan from graduate school and a really useless piece of paper, right? And I desperately need work. And so, it wasn't a secret at all that I was unemployed and that I was looking for work. That wasn't a secret, okay? So, we have to stop and ask ourselves the why of that. And in my opinion, it's just because, people tend to think that, you don't you're not capable. There was a lot of other stuff going on too, a lot of other factors, a lot of other life. Because I know that in some of those facilities, they did have other blind people working. They did. And so they knew, that blind people weren't capable. So in some of those were capable. So in some of those jobs, I do know that it wasn't just a blindness factor. Like there was a lot of other stuff going on, right, in my life at that time. But at the same time, I know that some of the jobs that I applied for, it, there's a question mark there, right? There's a question mark that we have to ask ourselves why. We don't know the why, but there's a big question mark there, and we should certainly, examine that and ask the question of the why. So I think, to me, one of the best ways that we can help people who are visually impaired, who are blind, who are legally blind, to get better employment opportunities and to reduce that unemployment rate is to just say, hey, look, we have this technology available. People really don't understand the amount of technology that we have that's available. They don't understand screen readers and magnification and zoom, and not everybody who's visually impaired who walks into that office door with a guide dog or a white cane is totally blind. I used a combination of zoom and magnification and screen readers, and I still do to this day. I use all of the above. And so people just think, how are they going to access the computers, and how are they going to get to work, and how are they going to do this, and rather than even ask, because you also do have to be careful about what you ask people in regards to their disabilities. People are just really have an idea that we can't do those things, when oftentimes we do find ways to adapt and to modify and to show up into that office, right? Show up into the office with their white canes, with their guide dogs. I've had friends in wheelchairs who, take the elevator, take the bus, take the elevator, and roll on into their office job. And they find ways to get to work. If they want the job, right? They find ways to get to work. So anyways, I think the best way that we can help deal with those issues in our society and in our world, now that we do have basic laws to deal with, the infrastructure issues of accessibility, is to tackle the issues of technology, internet accessibility, and just beliefs and attitudes in the world, so that we can have those conversations and people can hopefully when you're at an office, right? I'm going to stop knitting now because I think this video has been long enough. But hopefully if you're at an office, or you're working somewhere, or you're volunteering somewhere, I can help you know that when that person comes in for that job interview and they happen to have a white cane or a guide dog, you can say, hey, wait a minute, you know what, I saw this lady on the internet knitting, and she used to work at a college, and she had a job, and she had a guide dog, and she had a white cane. And so I just hope that I can help put it out there in people's ideas and in people's minds. I want to break down the attitudinal barriers. I want to break down the stereotypes. I want to help people in the world see that people with visual impairments and who are considered legally blind, and people who use white canes and who use guide dogs, we are very capable of having jobs and of doing everyday life things. So we're going to talk about these things this month, okay? We're not going to only talk about that, and we're definitely going to sit and we're going to stitch, and we're still going to talk about yarn. But I just wanted to start off Blindness Awareness Month having this little convo with you all about why I decided that yes, it's a yarn channel, yes, it's also a vlog, and why I'm choosing this month in October to talk about it a little bit more, so we can hopefully just conversate about these things. So okay, we just knit, I think 4. We knit 1 row, we purl 1 row, we knit 1 row. So here's the blankie. I'm guessing that I should probably turn on the light, right? I should probably turn on the light for y'all. Okay, hang on. I think it's gotten pretty dark. Hold on. Oh my goodness, it's really dark. Ha! Okay, So here's the blanket. Look at that. This is what we've done the last couple of days. Like I said, it's a long blanket. It's like basically as wide as this bed. So it'd be really long if indeed I finish this blanket. I think I'm about done working on the portion though where we can chat and craft and talk. So I'm gonna have to make decisions now. So anyways, here it is. Sorry, I did not realize that it got so dark. I was just knitting away. Alrighty, my friends. Well, you know what I say, right? Creativity is for everybody, whether you see or you see like me, which is not in color, or you don't see at all. Creativity is for you. And whether it's knitting or crocheting or sewing or quilting or beading or sculpting or painting or whatever it is that you do, today is a great day to craft and create. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, happy stitching. Bye-bye for now.